There's a disease that continues to impact all of us in our modern society. Its origin can be traced back to the Garden of Eden, yet its effects can be seen all around us today. This disease cares not about one's political views, one's social status. It has no respect for religious views either, nor does it care about the color of your skin. It shows up unannounced. It's hard to predict when it will arise. In fact, right now you might be battling this disease. It's called fear. Are you afraid? Are you worried about what is going on in our world today? Are you afraid for our nation? Are you afraid for others? Are you afraid for yourself? Are you afraid because circumstances are against you? Are you afraid because of your profession, your workplace? Are you afraid for your career, your job, your education? Are you afraid as to what the future holds? And are you afraid for the church? Are you afraid because you're a Christian? If you are, I want to talk to you. Politically speaking, things were against Daniel. He had done everything that he could. He had reasons to be afraid. He was a slave in Babylon, so he understood the heaviness that comes with being taken from one's own country, one's own heritage. He understood restrictions in order to maintain the common good of kingdom, so he could sympathize with us. He could sympathize with the disenfranchised. So you know what it felt like. Prophetically speaking, Daniel understood the future of the world. He knew Jesus was coming, the rock. So he can sympathize with Adventists. Morally speaking, Daniel understood the lack of rectitude from those who are high ups, and he understood that there is a righteous God who seeks to correct kings. He could sympathize with those who call for a change morally. Through all of this, Daniel was a distinguished gentleman. Daniel was a faithful individual in a moment when men were faithless. Daniel was a faultless individual in a moment when men were looking to find fault in him. Daniel was an obedient man to the law of God in a moment of lawlessness. While men united to impede his progress through unjust laws and unjust punishment, the Bible tells us in Daniel 6:10, Daniel knew that the decree was signed. He went home, and in his upper room with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. There are a few things that strike me about Daniel, and a few lessons that we can walk away with from this verse. In a moment where he should be fearful, we read that Daniel was a man of action. He took steps, and these steps we can learn from. And if we follow, our hearts will be relieved of its fears. From this text, we first learn that Daniel knew the decree was signed. We're not told that Daniel heard that the decree was signed. We're told that he knew. He had understanding. He understood the content of the decree. He understood the context in which it was taking place. He was not ignorant of laws, nor was he ignorant of the men. He understood the content of his nation, and I believe that lack of knowledge leads to a greater level of fear. And when one has understanding, fear is eliminated. We fear that which we do not know. Being familiar with decrees helps to give a better understanding of issues. As believers, we need to be like Daniel. We need to seek understanding. This was common in Daniel's life. He sought understanding regarding nations, but he also sought understanding regarding his God. The second thing we learn, Daniel went home. Now, Daniel could have gone before the king and expostulated with him about his case. He could have tried to reason with the unjust men who sought to cast him down from his post. But he did not. Time was too precious for Daniel to approach the magistrates of kingdoms. His understanding was a cause for another visit. He could not trust his case with any other king except the one who rules over all kings. So he went home. We don't know how long Daniel's walk was, but I am sure he had some time to process. Daniel might have been indignant. We don't know. But his decision was to walk away, to go home and find his upper chamber. When decrees are against you, when evil men conspire to overthrow you, take note, but take some time away. Many lives could have been spared if men and women chose to manage their anger better. Yes, you may be upset, but do take some steps back, ponder, but don't just process. Daniel did something else. So here's my third point. When Daniel found his upper chamber, I imagine him in his old age, which he was old at this point, opening his windows towards Jerusalem. He opened it with sadness, but at the same time, gratitude in his heart. So he gazes toward Jerusalem for a while, and I imagine him doing that. When you are afraid, here's the lesson. Open your windows toward Jerusalem. You see, Daniel never forgot that he did not belong where he was. He knew that he was a pilgrim. He knew that his city was where God dwells, and his heart was with the people of God. His heart yearned for Jerusalem and for God's people. His compassion for his city drove him to his knees. Modern day Daniels look toward the condition of our earthly Jerusalem, devastated because of sin, and they pray for the city and the people of God. But they also look higher to another Jerusalem. On their lips the refrain like John the Revelator, and I saw the new Jerusalem coming down from heaven, from God, as a bride adorned for her husband. Beloved, in the city of God there will be no death, no sorrow, no crying. When you are afraid, seek to understand. Go home, but open your window toward Jerusalem. We are called to be so heavenly minded that it shows in our earthly acts down here. When people look at us at home, let them see the true meaning of Christianity. Let them peer into our homes and see that we are not bickering and fighting each other, but rather let them see faith that takes hold of God in prayer. When the world sees the laws of men in contrast with the righteous lives of God's people, God gets an opportunity to work mightily in their favor. So be like Daniel. Live righteously before men as you live in nations. So Daniel knelt and prayed 3 times a day. He slowly makes his way, I imagine, down to his knees, and in that posture of submission, he prays. Here's my 4th point. Humility goes a long way. Daniel's posture suggests to you and I that no matter how far you excel in life, because he was indeed one of the highest in the kingdom, learn to kneel down and pray. No matter how devastated or angry you might feel, learn to submit before God in your moment. Submission to God means that we choose not to fight our own battles, but rather we allow him, the Lord of hosts, who is mighty in battle, to fight for us. Many unjust wars could have been spared if God fought our battles. So yes, understand the decree. Walk home, but also learn to submit to God when you are afraid. My 5th point. When you pray, remember to be thankful. We are told the content of Daniel's prayer when the Bible says he prayed and gave thanks before his God. Daniel's relationship with his God is so amazing that in a moment when things can become quite confusing, where things raises more questions than there are answers, when things get hard, not because of any bad things on his part, Daniel gave thanks to his God. How can you be thankful in a moment like this? Well, you see, you cannot be afraid of that which you accept. And the moment you thank God in your darkness, that's the moment you realize that there's a power that drives fear away. A power that you can never access in your moment of ingratitude. And a power that drives light into your darkness and turns your night into a day. Here's what we can take away from Daniel. He was not one to take justice into his own hands. His name means God is my judge. He committed himself to him who judges righteously. Now, you might not be familiar with the end of the story. That day, the law was meted out against Daniel, but angels were sent also to his aid. He was thrown into the lion's den, but the seconds it took for him to land was just enough time for the angels to close the mouths of those beasts. When you are a Christian who is loved by God, like Daniel, even lions become tame. Kings become converted. and nations change. So when you are afraid, be like Daniel. Understand the decree. Go home. Open your window toward Jerusalem. Kneel down. Pray with thanksgiving. And you will see the mighty miracles that God will work on your behalf.